In 1980, Nintendo had a few arcade hits in Japan. They wanted a piece of that sweet American arcade market companies like Taito were experiencing, so they outsourced and made 3,000 radar scope games for the United States, because the game was a huge hit in Japan. The game wasn't a hit and they had to revamp. Enter Miyamoto and his idea for a game that eventually led to Donkey Kong. The video game nerd lore is that his early inspirations were Popeye and King Kong. Donkey Kong became a massive hit. I think this is mostly because if you check the arcades prior to 1983, players controlled everything but a person. Jumpman was one of the first characters who looked like a recognizable person in the arcade. It was also one of the first platformers. Most games were shooters and racers prior to 1983. Couple that with Saving Your Girlfriend Pauline, and it's a creation for success. This is really where popular gaming culture is taken into the princess being rescued idea. Only because we could never forget soon after, sorry but our princess is in another castle from Super Mario Bros. But I think most people have forgotten the story. Yes, there is a story, and I too forgot it until I read the account in The Perils of the Princess, Gender and Genre in Video Games by Sharon R. Sherman in Western Folklore. The story goes like this. One day, the kingdom of the peaceful mushroom people was invaded by the Koopa, a tribe of turtles famous for their black magic. The quiet, peace-loving mushroom people were turned into mere stones, bricks, and even field horsehair plants, and the mushroom kingdom fell into ruin. The only one who can undo the magic spell is the Princess Toadstool, daughter of the Mushroom King. Unfortunately, she is presently in the hands of the great Koopa Turtle King. Mario, the hero of the story, maybe, hears about the mushroom people's plight and sets out on a quest to free them from the evil Koopa and restore the fallen kingdom. You are Mario. It is up to you to save the mushroom people from the black magic of the Koopa. While Koopa and the other Koopalings retain their use of magic, they have certainly downplayed that whole black part since then. I guess the Mushroom King died along with Princess Toadstool's magic. Why did she lose it? When did she lose it? I guess Mario has always had a kind of magic, what with the mushrooms and fire flowers and feathered Tukani suit. But in this instance of the subject-object dichotomy, at least the first go-around, Toadstool was a magic ball that was going to free the kingdom of a black magic curse set by Koopa. You are not rescuing the princess because she is inherently helpless. You are rescuing her because she holds the power to free her people. The inference that could be drawn here is that she was captured not just because she was female, but because she holds the magic powerful enough to stop Koopa's own. And while true, she has not been a playable character again in the main Mario franchise since Super Mario Bros. 2, the US version, I would argue that the spin-offs are franchises in their own right. The subject-object dichotomy is a philosophical issue and analysis of human experience that arises from the premise the world is made of objects. In this sense, Peach is being transformed from a captured person to an object of possession. How this bears relevance in this instance is that much like Andromeda or Cleodolina in St. George and the Dragon, Peach is threatened by a dark, unforeseen force rising up to take her. Chaos versus order, if you will. A monster that lurks underneath and comes out to threaten structure. If you're like the females in the classic stories I talked about, then you are being offered for sacrifice. I imagine this to be different than abductions, which are far more common in video games. I mean, against the odds of a horde of people sacrificing you, what normal person would not need to be rescued? There are many tenets to the subject-object part of feminist epistemology. The one that is interesting in terms of how Sarkeesian is using it is producing theories of women that represent them as inferior, deviant, or significant only in the ways they serve male interests. And this is certainly true in a number of games that exploit this archetype. Wizards and Warriors and even Double Dragon are examples. However, given the plots of the original Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda, the females in those games are not only significant for male interests. Placing the princess in the objective case as the ball the men are fighting over seems disingenuous to the plot of the games and story. I mean, is Mario voluntarily setting out on the quest, collecting all that gold, risking his safety as the ground shifts beneath him because Bowser wants to fight over Peach to have her for himself? Bowser isn't even human. He's like a fire-breathing turtle dragon. The double down that Sarkeesian is referring to when it comes to Miyamoto and Zelda is different from the very first game. Don't even try to follow the Zelda timeline. It's an exercise in futility. You can't make logical sense of it. It is worth noting that in the original story, Ganon invades in order to plunge the world into darkness. It is Zelda herself who splits the Triforce and hides the pieces throughout the kingdom. When Ganon realizes she hid the pieces, he imprisons her. So, Link is really fighting through her dungeons and puzzles, right? Yeah, she is disempowered, but I would argue she empowers herself if she created the dungeons and the magical items and hid all the pieces of the Triforce. Ganon can't kill her, otherwise he'll never find the pieces. So she beat him with her intelligence. And while this happened to Zelda, It seems she was fully aware of the repercussions of hiding the pieces, right? She knew she would be imprisoned. Though if they had all the time to build all those dungeons, Ganon's army moves really slow, doesn't it? In 1996, the video game world was turned on its head with the release of Tomb Raider. Games released around that time were Mega Man X3, Ristar, Super Mario RPG, The Lost World Jurassic Park, Chrono Trigger, Vector Man, Sonic 3D, Donkey Kong Country 2, Earthbound, and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Pre-Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII, Tomb Raider easily rose to the top of the PlayStation 1 library, giving the system its first taste of a decent f***ing game aside from Resident Evil. And while Jill Valentine clearly predates Laura as a strong female protagonist who happens to fall into a world killing zombies, she never would rise to Laura levels for a number of reasons. One, I'm going to guess this cutscene has a lot to do with it.
Chris Redfield. Jill Valentine.
Joseph!
No! Don't go!
Even in 1996, no one took it seriously. Two, it's because of the genre of the game. As both Chris and Jill, you are placed in survival horror and are vulnerable and purposely weakened. Though much should be said that Chris is less significantly weaker and Jill is the easier player to start with. When you first played the game in 1996, it was new, hard as hell to control, and you ran your ass off from everything. You didn't feel strong or as adventurous as either character for a long time. Laura was different. Created by Toby Gard, she is simultaneously the most popular and controversial female gaming heroine. She is part Indiana Jones, part Clint Eastwood, part Samus Aran, all badass. What made the original Metroid game memorable was the utter sense of solitude one could get from exploring the planet Zebes. In Tomb Raider, for an adventure game with puzzles of sorts, trying to figure out, you truly were alone trying to get through these massive tombs. Gamers hadn't ever seen a game that was presented in a world with this immense. Laura was the first major character and heroine to have massive rooms to explore and puzzles to solve with no help. According to Wikipedia, and we know how academically reliable they are, Swedish pop artist Nina Cherry was inspiration for Laura's early designs. Buffalo stance? Really? She was originally designed as a South American woman named Laura Cruz, but Eidos wanted a more British-friendly origin of Croft and thus pushing strides back for women of color and race in gaming. She is the original Barney badass in gaming though. Think of one prior to her. There were some, but none with her attitude. What, Jimmy and Bimmy? Lance and Bill? Hager? Simon Belmont? Roston? Shinobi? The naval hacker from System Shock? Ed Carnby from Alone in the Dark? There are some, but consoles did not show them off well and PCs were just starting to take off into the mainstream. Sure, the characters kicked ass in their own right, but none of them had Laura's air of confidence. She possessed an over-the-top, ostentatious display of arrogance and conceit, a strut that conveyed insolence, defiance, and a disrespect for authority. She didn't seem to have reservations or fear or worry. She killed fucking T-Rexes with a pair of pistols. Massive caverns and canals to explore, traps to avoid, Laura did not become the bit girl of the 1990s because she is a hot woman, but rather because of the quality of the game in relation to the other games that came out within a couple years to her game. There is no comparison, and truthfully, if you were to imagine Laura were a man in the game, maybe Lucas Croft, the game would not have played out the same, at least not at that time. Hell, a competitor in the Uncharted franchise did not come out until 2007. And Nathan Drake, as charming as he is played as a bumbling comedic hero. Tomb Raider would have never succeeded as it did with a male protagonist in 1996. I don't think players would have cared as much about his plight. As far as Laura's sexuality is concerned, it wasn't played up much in the actual game. Yes, she is a woman, but the unrealistic part really is that she's wearing short shorts while spelunking. In retrospect, look at her. There's nothing sexy about her, at least compared to the dreck they publish now. It's the public that turned her into a sex idol, and the company and the media certainly played upon this ever since.
What makes you sweat? Is it passion? Or could it just be heat? What about not knowing if your very next breath will be your last? What about all three? Tomb Raider from Eidos Interactive.
In Does Laura Croft Wear Fake Polygons? Anne-Marie Schleiner classifies Laura in several categories. Among these are Laura as Frankenstein monster, Laura as drag queen, Laura as dominatrix femme fatale, and Laura as a positive role model. As a female Frankenstein monster, she is like an offspring of science, an idealized, eternally young female techno-puppet created for men to stare at. Some feminists see this as a disturbing trend in gaming culture where boys and men are reinforced by unrealistic body ideals.
When toys for boys become more than toys.
Originally, when I first got her, I called her my synthetic girlfriend. But it's actually progressed to the point where it's like, she's my wife.
37-year-old Dave Cat from Detroit says he has been in a relationship with his sex doll for more than 10 years. And it's in it, or in her, that he found his better half.
Just let her sleep. It's not even worth getting her out of bed at this point.
The interesting part of this argument is that it only takes the perspective of the heterosexual male of being the one who is doing the actual gaming. So given that, Laura as drag queen, then the predominantly male players of the games like Tomb Raider are drawn in to identify with Laura by being immersed in the combat and puzzles. Laura operates as an externalized Lacanian mirror image of the subject, or player. In his essay, The Mirror Image, Jacques Lacan identifies the key moment when an infant first recognizes his or her reflection in the mirror. This perception of the self and develops and extends throughout an individual's lifetime. The argument can then be made over the course of the game that the construction of the player's feminine identity emerges from this reflective connectivity young boys and men get to experiment by virtually putting on this feminine outfit. This is certainly true in many MMORPGs and early dungeon crawlers and MUDs. With Laura as a dominatrix or femme fatale, men may gain sadistic or even masochistic pleasure from defeating enemies in the game who are often male. It's possible that they may be, in fact, unconsciously aware why they might have an affinity for playing a character who they perceive to be the weaker sex, when in reality they are gaining some type of pleasure from trying on a female persona and defeating men. And then we get to Laura as being a positive role model. We can look at Deborah Tannen and Tracy Higgins' article, How Being a Good Girl Can Be Bad for Women.
Goodness, what beautiful diamonds. Goodness had nothing to do with it, dearie.
Violent, capable, and sexy women like Lara Croft might be better role model for girls than the few games that have been targeted specifically for girls. Think of Fashion Designer, The Littlest Pet Shop, Diner Dash, and Nanny Mania. Whatever you want to label her as, Laura is not the bimbo stereotype, the vapid battle trophy princess. Her backstory is that of a highly educated and adventurous upper-class British woman. She's adept at combat techniques and puzzle solving. Given the kinds of women represented in gaming, Laura is by far a positive step forward. Turns out, in terms of Laura, her sexuality hardly comes into play if you're a gamer. And I mean this. Published in the journal Sex Roles in 2009, Elizabeth Bem Marowitz and Dana Mastro wanted to study the short-term effects of exposure to sexualized female video game characters on gender stereotyping and female self-concept in emerging adults. In short, they wanted to see if playing a sexualized or non-sexualized female character had an effect on the player. They chose two versions of Lara Croft for users to play in their study when looking at differences across the sexualized and non-sexualized conditions. Now, their research is extensive, so you'll have to bear with me for a moment. They had some predictions about what the study might reveal. Playing games with certain female characters will predict player beliefs about physical, career, domestic roles, and abilities when it comes to gender. Playing with a sexualized female character will result in greater belief in traditional gender roles in comparison with playing a non-sexualized female character or no video game at all. Significant differences emerge for females when looking at the differences across the two versions of Laura. Females playing the sexualized version reported less favorable attitudes towards women than female participants who played the non-sexualized or no video game at all. This suggests that playing the sexualized character resulted in less favorable attitudes towards women with regard to women's physical capabilities. This was not the case for male participants. Men did not report differences in attitudes when playing either character. For women, playing the sexualized Laura resulted in lower self-efficacy in comparison to playing the non-sexualized Laura or no video game at all. This suggests that exposure to sexualized images of women in video games, at least among female players, may reduce confidence in their ability to succeed in the real world. In the game, the two character portrayals were identical in almost every way except for the degree of sexualization of their appearance. The findings from their study show that sexualized video game images of females can negatively affect women's feelings of self-efficacy. They did predict, however, that playing a non-sexualized female video game player may result in greater self-esteem in female players in comparison to playing a sexualized female character. Their findings did not show this. In other words, their study does not provide any support for the idea that, for women, playing a non-sexualized character or even a same-sex character of either a sexualized or non-sexualized nature positively or negatively affects levels of self-esteem. Overall, findings from this study suggest that the level of sexualization of female video game characters has limited effects on players' gender stereotyping. Second, playing the sexualized character for female participants resulted in less favorable judgments about female physical capabilities. Specifically, women who played the sexualized character were more likely to agree with statements suggesting that women were less physically capable in comparison to men, whereas the women who played the non-sexualized character were less likely to agree with such assertions. This indicates that even though the sexualized heroine was very physically able, playing this character led to greater gender stereotyping on the dimension of physical ability. It is unclear, however, why similar results did not emerge on the other two gender role dimensions, appearance and career and domestic work or anything else. What is interesting is that there was no clear evidence or trend that emerged from examining the means for the male participants. The failure to achieve significance in the data may be a consequence of inadequate statistical power, or it might mean that no such effects exist. Oh, but these studies are not only done for women and men about women. Christopher B. Bartlett and Richard J. Harris performed a study on both men and women, where the participants played with characters of their own gender who are muscular and skinny. Overall, the results suggest this study that when male participants played a video game that emphasized muscular male bodies, they had an increase in their negative body image. Specifically, these results showed that those who played the video game independent of condition had a decrease in positive feelings toward their body. They had a decrease in general body esteem and had a decrease in their positive attitudes towards muscularity. They also had a decrease in the drive for muscularity in general. This suggests that participants' affective and cognitive component of a negative body image were significantly impacted by video gameplay. The results of this current study suggest that women participants after playing a game emphasized that the female body felt significantly worse about their bodies as well. Specifically, it was found that women had a decrease in their positive feelings toward their body and a marginal decrease in their positive feelings of their sexual attractiveness. Interestingly, the results showed that there was not a significant change in the participants' body satisfaction scores. Women in gaming have made a lot of strides, but honestly, they're probably not enough. I would like to play a game where a female character is not overly sexualized, stereotyped, or really cardboard. But then again, I long to play any character that is not a walking, bubbling cliche of stupid, since story and cutscenes have become the de facto norm in gaming. Having said that, women in gaming will never stop being overly sexualized until television and film stop doing it, until culture stops doing it.
So what was really disturbing is that we found a lot of hypersexuality of the female characters in even television and movies aimed at little kids. There was research that just came out that showed that girls as young as 6 years old have started to self-sexualize. In other words, they have started seeing themselves through the male gaze and realizing that they need to be sexy in order to be appreciated.
Some girls now feel pressure to deliver porn star performance.
Anal is becoming the new oral.
Smartphones and social media make it possible not only for kids to consume X-rated images, but to produce them with devastating consequences.
My heart just dropped. I was like, how many people have seen me like this?
The damsel in distress cliché is a commentary on culture more so than it is on gaming, as this plot point device exists in films, cheesy romance novels, and bodice rippers, whose primary audience is female. This archetype does not exist in order to subconsciously or consciously propagate the subjugation, inferiority, or weakness of women, or to even foster male ejaculatory wet dreams in gameplay. It stems from a long tradition of story and culture. The arc of the hero archetype is not to simply bolster male fantasies of saving the girl, although that is certainly a large part of it. In Resistance Through Video Gameplay, It's a Boy Thing, Kathy Sanford and Leanna Madill discussed how these themes often overlap as they interviewed participants who talked about why they played games. One adult male was asked what characteristics of video game characters he admired. He responded,
"I'd like to have a big body, a six-pack, not an eight-pack. I'd like to be built. I don't want to be a drug dealer, king of the city."
When he was asked what about saving the girl, he answered,
"That would be neat. I've often had dreams about that. Meeting a girl doing something courageous, you know?"
Another adult participant commented on his desire to be a hockey player.
"I didn't ever play hockey. I don't know the rules. But in the game, I'm always trying to start a body check or start a fight."
Not all men are strong and full of machismo in real life, but they may want to try on that role through fantasy gameplay. An online experience allows one to extend this feeling of empowerment so that digitally shooting another player feels satisfying. Another example of resistance within gaming is the type of game or game character that player selects to play. The character is often strong, independent rebel. Think of Max Payne or all the Grand Theft Auto games, Manhunt, Counter-Strike, Prototype, Infamous, the list goes on. The characters are really independent, not like anybody else. Precludes them from making choices in characters who seem weak, dependent, or feminine. The researchers noted, we did not find evidence that learners were thinking consciously and reflectively about cultural models of the world, or that they were consciously reflecting on the values that make up their real or video game world. So maybe the vast majority of males in video games are independent, overly macho, rebellious, because the vast majority of males who play the games are not so overly macho, independent, and rebellious. This gives them a chance to try on the persona when they play the games. This is also why when people post online or act as a different avatar when they're posting in comments, they put on this same kind of persona. I don't know if you could believe Google, but there is a marked difference between the results in the news section if you search woman kidnapped versus man kidnapped. I'm not making the value judgment whether or not this kind of art, if you want to call it that, should imitate life in any way when I'm talking about women being kidnapped in video games. You can make that determination. What I am saying is that across the world, women and children seem to be kidnapped and taken far more frequently than men are. Is it backwards to allow aspects of that reality to enter into video games? I don't know if it is necessary, but by omitting it, are we admitting games are not created for adults? Or are we confusing weaker with capability across the board? Because that is different. I guess if anything, men use games as a place to comfortably roleplay and express the ideas of machismo, hypermasculinity, and femininity. I wouldn't be the first person to suggest that feminism, at least hyperfeminism, hurts men and masculinity in general. If you live in the world, you already know that men are generally physically stronger and that the notion that women are weaker than men is not false. Now, before you start yelling at me and offering up examples of someone you know who can bench press a new Ford Ranger with their nails freshly painted while giving birth and doing taxes at the same time, calm down. I mean generally, statistically, there will always be outliers in statistics. Games, as pretty much everything else in material life, do not exist in a vacuum, and much of the world still possesses and perpetuates sexist views, and this often happens willfully and purposefully. But we have to be careful as to what we label backwards and sexist. Views that are contrary to your own may be just that, contrary, and not sexist. But men are stronger. I bring this up because I'm responding to this assertion of Sarkeesian's later in her video.
We have to remember that these games don't exist in a vacuum. They're an increasingly important and influential part of our larger social and cultural ecosystem. The reality is, this trope is being used in a real-world context where backward sexist attitudes are already rampant. It's a sad fact that a large percentage of the world's population still clings to the deeply sexist belief that women as a group need to be sheltered, protected, and taken care of by men.
The belief that women are somehow a naturally weaker gender is a deeply ingrained socially constructed myth, which of course is completely false. But the notion is reinforced and perpetuated when women are continuously portrayed as frail, fragile, and vulnerable creatures.
1. According to the research I've discussed, she is not really correct. 2. There isn't a non-real world context where the games or even the motifs exist. 3. She is once again misusing language. Ability is not analogous to strength as it is capability. Males are stronger. I'm not offering this up as any kind of criticism. We run most of the world, and rightly so, because of this reality. When men get into a fight, it can be horrifying, entertaining, or even humorous at times. When women fight each other, there can be similar results. I cannot say for certain, but I know if you have an ounce of humanity within you, something happened when you watched this clip intermixed with the others.
Where is my fucking PlayStation then? Where is my
Keep
fucking
on breaking
PlayStation?
stuff and then I'll have no choice but to call the cops.
It's my TV. Don't
Get
even
out.
start.
Get out, Sean.
Don't even
Alfred, I'm
start.
protecting myself.
No, you're not.
Get out.
Don't start. Move,
No.
please. It's my TV. It's not yours. Fucking bitch.
Obviously, I don't know what you felt, but I gather it was not the same emotion you felt watching the others. Again, rightly so. It is true that the man rescuing a damsel robs her of her becoming a heroine in her own story in most instances. It also robs the man of becoming an object of desire. The repeated use of this keeps a particular character from being a heroine, but it is not stopping anyone from creating a new, interesting, independent character to star in her new game. It's also not stopping anyone from flipping the script, as recent modders have done for their young daughters. Last year, Mike Hoy had changed the pronouns in Wind Waker so that Link was female and Zelda was male. Mike Mika recently modded Donkey Kong so Pauline could save Jumpman. Kenna W modded The Legend of Zelda so you could play as Zelda and save Link. Hey developers, add an option that allows people to play as a female Sonic or Mega Girl instead of making modding communities do it. How much work is this for you to do the palette swap? Anything good or memorable about classic characters has already been destroyed by you. It's not like you can further hurt their legacies. As I mentioned, it seems that these ideas about the weakness and inferiority of women come from other places, and gaming seems to have little effect on the negative views, particularly when it comes to males. The trope robs those characters of the chance of becoming heroines in their own right, and it kind of assumes that they have some sort of right to be there in the first place. The pattern of presenting women as weak, ineffective, or incapable can have larger repercussions beyond their characters and their games. That is, of course, if one chooses to interpret the kidnapping of a specific character or woman as being indicative or representational of all women rather than that particular woman. Does the damsel in distress cliché as a recurring motif help to normalize extremely toxic, patronizing, and paternalistic attitudes about women? Or does it help to teach adolescents that they should go out and actually fight chaos when it threatens order, rather than being the anti-hero in an open-world sandbox environment? There's another familiar tale from Greek mythology that has a message for us as well. The story of Daedalus and Icarus, where one of our most beloved heroes gets his name. Icarus' father, Daedalus, was a master craftsman, and he was commissioned to create an elaborate labyrinth for King Minos of Crete to imprison the Minotaur. Daedalus revealed the secret of the labyrinth to Ariadne, Minos' daughter. When Minos found out about the betrayal, he imprisoned Daedalus and Icarus inside the labyrinth. The rest of the myth is where people tend to get familiar with it. Daedalus fashioned a pair of wax wings for himself and Icarus so they can escape the island. He warns his son not to fly too high to the sun or the wax wings would melt and the wings would not work. Icarus does not heed his father's warning and he flies too high and plummets into the sea. It is a story of hubris and failed ambition, a warning about moderation and the dangers of technology and obeying your elders. There's a part of the Icarus story that gets left out in modern times. Daedalus also warned Icarus not to fly too low to the sea or the wings would get wet and ruined. We should not aim our ambitions too low either and keep the current circumstances. The safe path in life is the easy path. Billions of us follow that path every day. If you're lucky, you get a gold watch in retirement, but mostly you just get old. This path is average. Your dreams get pushed aside for convenience and comfort. Fear is what creeps in and it owns you. It's what makes people in debt with an MBA they didn't really want and a family they thought would make them happy. You resent yourself and your choices, and you start to feel guilty for blaming those close to you. And after a while, you may begin to believe you aren't extraordinary or capable, and you resign to the fact that you've settled for safe. People who needlessly attack Sarkeesian are flying too close to the sea. Don't be afraid of change or things that can upset the status quo. The world can give us better women in gaming than it has, but it can give us better people in gaming than it has too. All representations in gaming have an uphill battle. Before we start making demands on the gaming industry and media as a whole, maybe we should start making them on ourselves. We change ourselves, we change the culture, we change the world, the games follow.